for joining me in this video, and today is going to be a very special video because I have my boyfriend Ian as a very special guest,
Hi.
and I'm going to interview him about depression. So as the title says, this is going to be the depression interview. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Alright, so when did your depression start?
So I wasn't officially diagnosed until college, but I think it goes back a good bit longer than that. I've seen psychiatrists and psychologists going all the way back to when I was a little kid for anxiety, um, but I think I've had undiagnosed depression probably since my teenage years and maybe going back a lot longer. Just wasn't really something that was really talked about much in my family, so it's a little bit hard to say.
Okay, what are your most common symptoms?
So most common symptoms are like hopelessness, worthlessness, feelings of apathy. I'm a terrible ruminator, so when my depression is bad, my habit is to kind of wake up super early in the morning, not sleep very much in general, um, because another like very significant symptom is insomnia. But I wake up early in the morning and sort of obsess endlessly over the ways in which I'm like a terrible person, or all the ways in which I fucked up in various capacities, the ways in which I'm a failure, and so forth. I also have really intense feelings of like guilt and shame. Uh, I've never engaged in like cutting, and I don't really cry very much. So it's sort of more cognitive for me. It's just like this endless, repetitive focus on um, my perceived worthlessness, and that slowly drains me of any desire to do anything else except sleep, which, as I mentioned, I actually will have like considerable difficulty doing.
That's rough, definitely. Has your depression ever been so bad that you experienced things like hearing voices or seeing things?
No, luckily I never had any symptoms like that.
That's good. How long do your episodes typically last?
So quite a while in some cases. I would say in at least two instances they've lasted like a year or more. Um, so it's in all honesty, it's kind of easier to think of like instances in my life where I wasn't depressed than to think of
Mm-hmm.
instances where I was. I think for me it's a very sort of chronic kind of thing, but it definitely like waxes and wanes in intensity. And
Yeah. Do you have any triggers?
yeah, so I have a couple. The most specific ones are like anything to do with health, like anything to do with my health or the health of like my loved ones. So I lost my father at a fairly young age, and that really instilled in me like a horror of hospitals and sort of all things medical. And so reflecting on things like that will definitely trigger me. I still sort of have flashbacks to like periods like that of just like
Mm-hmm.
hotel corridors and like hospital corridors and hospital rooms and so forth. So yeah, the thought of a person I care about getting sick will really fuck with me.
Yeah, I can understand that. Have you ever had suicidal thoughts?
Yeah. In all honesty, many times. I guess I've like gone so far as to like make fairly detailed plans, but it's not something that I've ever really considered actually carrying out. I What's strange about depression, at least for me, is that it really diminishes my concern for my own well-being, um, and makes me feel like I basically have no obligations to myself. But I still have like intense feelings of like obligations to friends and family and stuff like that. And so I've never really seriously considered killing myself because I don't want to hurt people I care about, like my mom
Yeah,
and stuff.
good reason. What are some activities you do to make yourself feel better?
Walking, like endless walks. I find that really therapeutic. Just exercise in general, I think is very therapeutic. Like I've been going for bike rides a lot. I guess I read somewhere that like one of the most profound antidepressant um, techniques is just exercise, and that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely true in my experience.
Yeah.
I also keeping a journal has been helpful. Talking to friends and family and so forth. Um, and so I've done some cognitive behavioral therapy, and sometimes I can sort of apply those skills I've learned in that to my own case, like not to catastrophize things, ways of getting yourself out of like, you know, um, depressive thought patterns.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you ever self-medicated for your depression? Did you feel like you had to drink heavily? If so, did you feel the effects wore off?
Yeah, so definitely, yeah. And And I would like strongly encourage people not to do that, even though it sort of improves things in the short term and drastically um, makes them worse in the long term.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've definitely drank heavily over periods in my life, and I think that was depression induced as a way of kind of trying to medicate. Um, and I've sort of worked through those issues with therapists and so forth. Um, like I said, it makes you feel better in the short term, but it really saps you a little bit more every single day. I mean,
Mhm.
alcohol being a depressant after a while.
Yeah, yeah. So, are you getting treatment and do you have a support system?
I am, and I do. So I see a therapist, uh, once every couple weeks, and I have for quite some time now. I see a psychiatrist, and my family and friends and professors, especially my professors, have been super supportive, especially in periods where I've had to kind of like, set the ball down gently and like care, do a little self care. They've been super helpful in that.
Good, good. What medications do you take and how do they make you feel?
Well, I've taken SSRIs for a while, and I'm still on one now, so I take Lexapro. Um, and I think the Lexapro, I think that has a pretty modest effect. The way I sort of feel it works is that it sort of raises the floor a little bit, like my lows aren't as low, and that's pretty cool. But it seems relatively modest. Um, so I think it also helps with rumination. But the problem is like a lot of them I've had difficulty tolerating. So I took Zoloft for a little while, but that seemed to give me like bad GI symptoms. Like a lot of them really suppress my appetite and just give me the kind of like a low grade nausea like all the time. So that's been frustrating. I also take mirtazapine or Remeron. I initially took it as an antidepressant. But it kind of gives you, or at least gave me like a very strong groggy feeling all the time. So now I just take it as a kind of insomnia medication, and it works really well for that. It just knocks me out.
That's good. Has anyone ever told you to just get over it or cheer up?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, I'm not really very forthcoming with my mental health issues, so I've only really told people who I like, trust in the first place. And they've been pretty cool. The one thing I will say is that I've gotten a kind of like benign incomprehension from certain people, like professors and stuff, who are like supportive but don't really understand what it is that I'm telling them. So, there's been a bit of that. I remember just someone being like, well, you should probably just get some sun, or things like this, or well, it's like fall, or it's getting dark out early, and that always makes me feel down. And it's like, well, it's not really like that exactly.
Right. No.
So.
Okay. What is the biggest misconception about depression?
So that's an awesome question, and I think I'll name a couple. So like the first top of the list is that it's like a kind of weakness, or it's like this, or it's sort of an equally pernicious thought is that it's like it's a kind of attention seeking, which I think people get a lot. Like, oh, woe is me, look at me, cheer me up, focus on me. So I think a lot of people, maybe particularly men, have trouble acknowledging depression for the former reason, right? They don't want to admit that they're like, depression is kind of this like inability to control your mood, and it's like just man up and get over it. Why are you so down all the time? And I think that's a really fucked up way of thinking, and I mean that's the kind of stuff that gets people killed. And so I do a little bit of research on depression, and it's sort of come to be associated as a kind of like feminine illness, or at least in the 20th century it really was, and I think it kind of goes back to some of that sort of just that kind of bullshit way of thinking. Yeah, and the attention-seeking stuff fills into that too. The other thing I would say is that there's this misconception that depression is kind of like like just like an endless crying spell or something. Like, oh, if you're genuinely depressed, then you're going to be fucked up and like crying all the time, and like unable to get out of bed, and like it'll be very evident to everyone that you're sort of like deeply sick or something. But at least, and for some people it is like that, but in my experience it hasn't really been like, I don't really particularly cry very much, and I don't think my symptoms like are sort of outwardly visible to a lot of people. And I noticed that with some people, they ask me like, oh, you said that you're super, super depressed, but you know, you still come to school every day, or you know, you still seem to like conduct your life more or less effectively. So, so what are you telling me? And I think for a lot of people, it's just difficult to realize that you can sort of do a lot and be like very severely depressed, but sort of seem outwardly okay. And I think sometimes actually people don't seek treatment because they think, well, I can't be in that bad a shape because you know I still go to work and stuff, and I just like fantasize about getting in a car accident on the way home.
Yeah.
So.
If you could get rid of your illness, would you?
Yeah, so that's another really, really good question, and I like. There's part of me that says like obviously yes, because like the part of it where it's like you just lie in bed and think about how you know you're like just this worthless piece of shit who like deserves nothing and all that stuff. Like there's just no upside to that. Like that should be gone, and if I could get rid of that, I would for sure. But there is another part of me where I can kind of understand the ways in which like depression kind of becomes a part of your identity or something. It's sort of hard to express that, like, or to articulate that exactly, but it's like, I would be a very different person if I didn't have suffered from depression, and there's a part of me that thinks that's like scared of the thought of not having that, you know, it would just change you so much.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'll just say that.
Okay. How do you see your future?
Positively.
Yay.
Very positively. Yeah, so it's funny, like in times where I'm super depressed, I see it in the bleakest terms imaginable. Like, one thing I think depression really does for most people is it accentuates the negative really, really dramatically and makes you attend to that to the exclusion of any positive things, or you know, you kind of just like explain away any kind of positive things in your life. So when I'm very depressed, I think, well, here's my future, you know, I'm just going to work, and I'm going to kind of hate my job, and I'm not going to get paid very well, and I'm going to struggle with debt, and slowly people I care about are going to die, and I'm just going to be alone, and I'll lose touch with my close friends, and it'll just be this, like, endless stretch of just emptiness, basically. So sometimes I see my life as fairly bleak, but when I'm thinking, when I'm sort of in a healthier frame of mind, I don't think that, right? I can appreciate the positives in a way in which my life has actually been incredibly fortunate in so many ways. And as some people might know, I mean, for a long time, depression, people kind of thought of melancholy as kind of like a vice, like something to be morally concerned about. And like obviously that's not the right way to think about it, but there's a kernel of truth there because depression really does make you like, not exactly unaware, but not focus on or not appreciating sort of the right way, like all the ways in which your life really is pretty good, you know, and all the sort of benefits and blessings you have in your life. So yeah, it's important to kind of focus on that and to focus on gratitude.
Yeah. All right, and final question, do you have any advice for others struggling?
Yeah, so I do. I have a lot of advice, but two things in particular. I mean, the first is like is seek help. Like, please seek help. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's easy to kind of rationalize away a lot of symptoms of depression. It's like, well, I'm just in a bad mood, or you know, whatever, I'm stressed, or whatever. But if you have any of the symptoms I mentioned earlier, like these persistent feelings of like worthlessness, or you know, stuff like that, then recognize that that's not just a phase, and it's also not like a weakness on your part. So you shouldn't be ashamed of feeling that way. And also that there are like caring, wonderful, talented people out there whose job it is to make you better and who will make you better, or at least can help you. And second, I think the other thing is, and as difficult it is, like it's important to not believe the things that depression tells you about your worth and your future and your position in life and so on, right? Because that stuff is just lies. Like it's just fucking lies, and it's very easy when you're very depressed to think I'm the only person in the world who like is seeing rightly that sort of my worth and the worth of the world around me. But you're just like and you don't know it. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me.
Yeah. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, I hope it's helped you guys, and thank you so much for watching. watching. If you've not subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. And I will see everyone in my next video. Bye guys.
See ya.